Hey folks, David Stewart here. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day. I'd like to talk a little bit today about the importance of storytelling, the importance of narrative. And I don't just mean for the culture. You can produce really great works of art, things that change people's mind, things that shift culture. That's part of it. But I mean storytelling and the narrative is important on a much lower level as well. It's important for how we tell our own stories to ourselves. The truth is that reality is a little bit too complex for people to hold it all in their heads. Many events may happen in a given amount of time, and how you tell the story of what those events did, what their outcomes were, how they affected you, and what they meant is an act of storytelling, and every person engages in this act of storytelling when they make memories, when they recall them, and especially when they share them to other people. There's always a filtering process that goes on with your memory, and you can test this yourself or do a couple of reflections to test this and think about how different the details are for things that happened today versus things that happened last Friday or things that even happened yesterday. You may remember that you did something last Friday, but the number of events you remember from that day is going to be fewer. You're going to remember the events that you felt like were important and had an impact, and you remember that those were important because of the importance of prior events. There's this long chain of narratives that help you contextualize all the things that happen in your life. This is normal and it's natural and it's part of our human existence and human experience to create these narratives that tell our story to ourselves. If you imagine you have a really bad breakup with a girlfriend or with a boyfriend, you're going to tell a story about how that breakup happened. You're going to tell a story about probably how that person caused the breakup more often than not. And the reason is we need ourselves to be a little bit less guilty in any particular circumstance than other people, just for us to recover mentally from something that's as traumatic as like a breakup. We tend to contextualize all the events, therefore, after the breakup happens, we recontextualize them in light of the breakup, and we tell a new story about how that relationship happened that may not have been true if we were to take our stock of where we were in the middle of that relationship. And like I said, this is a normal thing. This is part of normal existence. It's really hard to be so like psychologically healthy that you don't do any kind of narrativizing of the events of your life. And in fact, it's really important that we do this because that's how we figure out how to make future decisions. What were the important things that happened in the past, and how am I going to use those to predict future events, and how am I going to use those to make better or different decisions in the future from what I made in the past? For using like a bad breakup with a girlfriend as an example, how am I going to change what I do for the next relationship? How am I going to pick a better partner? How am I going to change how I treat that partner so that I don't end up in the situation where I either have to break up with them or they end up breaking up with me, whatever it happens to be. The narrative is really powerful. Now, when we get up above higher levels than that, the narrative is also really important, and whatever narrative for events that you're talking about, because these are the things that happen between us. So how you tell stories to other people and how you receive stories from other people is likewise used to predict future events and alter your behavior in the future and change those sorts of things. So if your friend had a really bad breakup, he may tell you all the things that were bad about his girlfriend, and then you use that to make sure you don't pick a girlfriend that was similar to his, or you keep an eye out for these things that happen in this other relationship to make sure that you are able to avoid the bad outcomes that happen from your friend's relationship. In fact, this is normal as well. Our ability to assess risk is not simply based on our own experiences, but the social experience as well. If Bill heard that there's a tiger down by the river, well, you probably don't want to go down by the river because why would you want to get eaten by a tiger? And that applies to everything else as well. Bill said that if you throw this kind of worm in the river, you'll get this kind of fish to come out. Well, boy, that's really useful information. And there's a little bit of a narrative to that as well. You put this worm in, I put this worm in, I put it on the hook a certain way, I threw it in the water, and boom, wouldn't you know it, a big fish bit it right away. Now that may have been accurate. We may have left certain things out. What time of day was it? Did you do something else? This is how some people come up with superstitious ideas. It's like, well, I said a prayer to this God and then the fish showed up, so I should say a prayer to that God every time. That's part of bringing things into the story, is we do events that we think have an outcome on things. We think that whatever we do is going to affect the future. That's why we do it. And the story is part of that. And you can see this not just in fiction, but you see this especially in news stories. And there's a higher level that begins to be engaged in news stories. Just like when you're telling your personal story, maybe about a bad breakup, there's a moral aspect to it too. There's an aspect to it of right and wrong. That's why we need ourselves usually to be in the right and the other person to be in the wrong. Or if we were definitely in the wrong, we need to feel like we've changed and we've repented and we've been able to change our behavior so that we don't do something like that again. Either one, right? And it varies by person and by event. But there's a moral element to any story, whether you're writing a piece of fiction or you're writing a news story. And so this is a position on news stories that I think a lot of people might find initially contentious, which is that news stories are stories. They are telling a story the same way that a novel tells the story. And they're fundamentally argumentative. That is, they are arguing for the truth, the coherency, the reality of some set of events and their meaning. And so if you have this mindset and you read news stories, you will start to see this pop up in news stories. First of all, they're telling you a story. Event A happened, event B happened, it caused event C. That's a really simple one. I'm just remembering this news story that happened kind of by my house when I lived in Central California. This guy was shot and killed at a park by my house. And we were like, what? I can't believe this. I thought we lived in a good part of town. And it was like really late at night. It was like 1 a.m. Like, oh man, I can't believe this happened. Turns out the guy who was shot and killed was killed by a police officer. We're like, oh, so this was a police involved shooting. Oh, the police officer wasn't on duty. This is several things that happened. There was a shooting. Oh, it was killed by an off-duty police officer. Well, that's weird. Then you start to uncover more facts until you finally have a narrative where the undercover police officer was actually there at the park with the woman. That woman was the wife of the man who was shot and killed, who had found out that they were having an affair, come and confronted her, and brought a pistol. Now, not a regular pistol, but like a BB pistol, something that looked threatening. The police officer who happened to be carrying at the time saw the gun, drew, and killed him, killed the husband of the woman he was having an affair with. Now, I'm telling you that story. This is really something that happened. And the guy who was shot and killed was like training to become a police officer himself. So it's weird. But all of those details that I gave you, what's their relevance to the bigger story? Well, I talk about this a lot. What are the 3 big elements of a story? Setting, characters, and plot. Where's the setting? Well, it took place, like I told you, in a park by my house in Central California, late at night. Where, when, what time, what time period? A couple years ago, right? Who? That's the characters, right? It was a guy who was an off-duty police officer. A woman he was with at the park. The husband of the woman. Those are the 3 characters. The plot. They were having an affair. That's a prior set of events. The husband showed up to confront them. He drew what looked like a pistol. The police officer who was off-duty drew his personal firearm, shot and killed the man. So we have a set of events and we've contextualized all of them. Now, do I know for sure why that guy showed up there? No, I'm actually adding a layer to it. He went to confront them. That's the only reason why he would go to the park with a gun where his wife was meeting a strange man, would be to confront him. So this is something that was in the news stories, but no one ever really said. It's a context that kind of arises out of the events. And even if I were to just tell you that events without those, you would start to draw that conclusion. Well, this is what was happening. Was this guy went to confront the police officer, or the guy who was having an affair with his wife. He maybe didn't know that it was a police officer. We don't know. Maybe he didn't know, that's why he brought the gun to scare him. And the result was that he ended up being killed. So went to confront someone who was having an affair with his wife. That makes sense. That contextualizes all the events. It puts them into a frame. It makes them a story that is coherent with a beginning, middle, end. It has a conclusion. Events lead to other events, which cause the tragic death of this man. So that's a news story. And when you're aware of this, you'll start to see this in lots of other news stories too, especially if there's a moral element involved. What's the moral element of this guy shooting this other guy? Well, that he had a personal firearm. He was an off-duty police officer. People start to think of him as not necessarily a bad guy. A guy who was carrying a gun in the right. He was the right kind of guy to be carrying a gun. He's somebody who carries a gun as part of his job, and he's somebody who reacted to what looked like a gun and shot and killed him. And that was appropriate. So we've made we've moralized the entire narrative to draw a conclusion of who was right and who was wrong and why. But you'll see this in news stories. If the events are uncertain, what journalists will do is they will start to bring opinions into a news piece. You need to be very aware of this. I've documented it several times on the channel. But what they'll do is they'll have an opinion from an expert, or in some cases, just regular people. I remember this article that I think it was from the New York Times about this guy who was injured being forcibly removed from a Delta Airlines plane. And so in the middle of the narrative, there's event, they stop, and then they give you opinions from random people about how bad it was that they did this. Then they went on with the events. Why do they give you that opinion? They're giving that to you to frame the entire set of events with a moral argument in mind, that it was wrong that this happened to this man. Delta Airlines was bad for doing it. Now, when I investigated that, we went a little bit deeper. We found, when we looked at the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times, that there was actually a lot more than that, because this happened to happen in Chicago. And they had a specialized police force that was just at the airport in Chicago. And Delta asked them to remove a guy from the plane, and they did. And they did it with force. They forcibly pulled him out of the chair, and he got injured in the process of that. Now, they could have been wrong for doing it. They could have been bad for doing it. But the article, the original article in question, gave you the opinion that you were supposed to have, because the events were so uncertain and cloudy. Someone might come to a conclusion, well, that was Delta's property. Oh, no, well, here's some random people to reinforce that socially everybody thinks this is wrong. So there's that social element, again, to the stories. So once you're aware of this, you should be able to become a little bit immunized to the way that the media works with narrative. Be a little bit more critical. If you notice an opinion, even an expert opinion, in an article that should otherwise be telling you the facts, then that is an indication that you should take a step back and think about how those story events could be recontextualized to possibly mean something else. Okay, so that's the narrative. And you'll notice that many things get recontextualized into some other narrative, a higher level, political narrative. People bad, environment good. People must go away so Earth can thrive. That's like an environmentalist narrative. So you're going to see that over and over again. Hello, cat. You're going to see things about man bad, woman good. So men have toxic emotional responses to things. Anytime you see any kind of event with men, you may have it contextualized in some feminist frame, a socialist frame, a Marxist frame. These sort of frames and ways of looking at the events have a big impact in the way that we perceive news. So being aware of how stories are told, and news stories are stories, and they're told just like fiction. Knowing how stories work will give you a layer of immunity so that you don't be convinced of things that maybe aren't real, and you are not automatically following along with the political ideology of people who want to alter your life in some particular way. So that's it for today. Sorry about the phone going off, but I felt like this is a good take, so I'm going to keep it. Leave me your thoughts down below in the comment sections. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You can read, I don't have my story writing manual out yet, but I'll try to get that out, the Storycraft book. But for now, you can read my Keys to Prolific Creativity, which really focuses on how to develop a great creative process so that you can be productive, so you can finish your projects on time and under budget. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you next time. Have a great one.